From King Street to Pennsylvania Avenue, the calls for social justice have shined a glaring spotlight on instances of systemic racism and injustice. On November 3rd, it's time for Democrats to answer those calls and vote for systemic change and equal justice for all.
We've been at it for a long period of time. It's time to address the issue.
For those, especially the young people that are fighting and demanding justice, I was them just 5 years ago. After the tragedy of my sister being murdered and a mother, Emmanuel, I was shouting, I was in the streets demanding justice. So my message to all the young people that are out there, continue to fight, and we need to make sure not only do you fight in the streets, but at the ballot box.
I think it's important to remember that social justice is more than just protest and people gathering in the streets and walking with signs. Oftentimes, those are the results of social injustice. Those are not the trigger. Those are the things that happen once people are fed up with not having, there's always this breaking point.
We can have a solicitor's office that not only does justice in terms of people who are offenders and healing the harm to victims, but that reaches out to education, to healthcare, to housing.
I mean, I work in the criminal justice system every day as a public defender, and I think that the thing that is most promising about these protests is the understanding that this is not just about police reform, that this is about investing in communities.
Times are of such a state in America that we cannot remain silent when we see injustices.
How do we make sure that when we look back at 2020, we realize that it was the start of a movement that really addressed these issues in a meaningful way?
Democrats need to understand that we are witnessing a movement that has been going on for generations.
When I worked for Congressman Lewis, people would say, we can't make progress, we haven't made progress. He would say, come walk in my shoes. He was born in rural Alabama in 1940 into a world where there were so-called literacy tests that were used to suppress black Americans from registering to vote. And he marched against those, and then he got elected to Congress, and he got to live his legacy. He got to see the progress that he made in his own lifetime. So I think we've come a long way, but I think his legacy is an example that we can go a lot farther in our own lifetimes.
It's not just any one thing, though. It's making sure that economic opportunity, education, and of course criminal justice and law enforcement reforms, they have to be a priority, and this is the moment to do them.
And we realized that came to a tipping point after George Floyd's murder this summer. We're realizing that there's a lot that has to be done.
Everyone's happiness and their liveliness should be included in what we're doing. And if people don't feel like they're included in that, then that needs to change.
As you look at these marches being led across the world, mostly by young people who understand what African Americans have been saying for some time. We want to be heard. We want to be allowed to have the same level and be treated with the same level of dignity and respect as any other human being. And that's what we're hearing across the country.
Right in the Declaration of Independence, it says all men are created equal, and we have yet to realize that goal.
Everybody said, why you need a hate crime bill? Well, 5 years ago when I first started out, there were 5 states that didn't have a hate crime law in their states. Now we're down to 3. Here we are, South Carolina, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Those are the last 3. I don't want the state to be in the last 3.
So, when we look at social justice today, where there is no justice, there is no peace. Individuals are rising up for a reason. Systemic racism is real.
But it's time to understand why, if you're of a given race, you stand a very big chance of being killed by a policeman. And it's time to talk about that. We need to talk about it and change it.
I grew up in the civil rights era. I grew up with understanding that institutional racism exists. We all have to be able to come to the table understanding that it is. Once we get to that, then we can think about how we move forward.
We have to have people who are involved who understand the issues and are willing to work to address some of the systemic problems like heirs property and folks that are in underserved communities that have traditionally been oppressed
We can't fix the social justice network like we need to unless we fix our criminal justice network.
In America, most people understand the need and the importance of having highly trained, competent emergency personnel. What we don't expect are individuals who arrive with a predisposed bias.
We suffer from a value gap in this country. And as elected officials, we all need to admit that institutional racism exists.
Well, the reality is we're at an inflection point in our nation's history. What we've seen in this summer of 2020, the summer of unrest, is people realize that the issues that have plagued marginalized communities, distressed communities, issues like criminal justice, issues like healthcare, issues like housing, these are issues that have long existed, but we're finally getting to a point where we're seeing that the people who are in office, the institutions that perpetuate the systemic racism and this institutionalism, we're seeing that they're responding in a way that we haven't before.